Another SF writer who used fear and used it brilliantly is Louis Scheiner. His short story, White City, involves a real person, Nikola Tesla, the physicist who developed dynamos, transformers, electric bulbs, and the high-frequency Tesla coil. Tesla's own neurotic fears and phobias play a major role in Scheiner's story.
I think that Tesla was a really, really weird human being. But in many ways, he was kind of the ultimate scientist. Tesla was afraid of the dark, quite possibly because he may have, as a child, killed his own brother. This is not known. His brother fell down a flight of steps and died. Tesla was there, whether he tripped him or pushed him or something. We don't know, but he was even weirder after his brother died. He then became afraid of the dark, and of course the dark in fantasy traditionally represents the supernatural, the irrational. And he was rational literally to a fault. Everything to him was calculated. He literally measured in his mind the amounts of food that he took bite by bite. He was obsessed with counting his steps. Everything was numbers, counting, quantified, which is just another way of trying to drive away the darkness. And I think that science, in a lot of ways, is trying to do that. I saw Tesla as an emblem of what science is trying to do even now. Nanotechnology, for example, is a way of trying to quantify things to the point that there is no more darkness, there is no more uncounted for stuff. And I think that's scary. I think it would take a lot of magic out of the world, which is what Tesla did in many ways. In that story, White City, there was no way to sort of do a footnote or anything, but he actually did plan to ignite the atmosphere. This is one of the things that he meant to do, but never quite got around to, his perpetual nightlight, which would have banished darkness from the world for all time.
Science helps us make sense of the universe, and so does art. Science fiction combines both. For example, Brian Stableford has a degree in biology, and that knowledge permeates his fiction. Recently, his books have tended to focus on two subjects, genetic engineering and fear. His story, The Growth of the House of Usher, retells Poe's tale with an organic living house which Usher has made from his dead sister's DNA. Hey, Usher, is your sister home? Yes. In The Empire of Fear, Stableford suggests that the European aristocracy is made up of vampires. Nice little metaphor there. Let's call England up. Hello, Brian. It's Commander Rick. I was wondering, why has fear begun to play such a large role in your work?
Well, there are only certain kinds of things which you can write stories about. There are only certain kinds of things which are dramatic, and fear is one of them. It's intrinsically suspenseful, and The Empire of Fear is a novel about immortality. It's about the fear of death. There is a quote made up, but attributed to Francis Bacon, which says, "The empire of fear hath but one tyrant, whose name is death, and his handmaiden is pain," are words to that effect. And that does seem to me to be a key element in writing stories about the human condition, and particularly about the possible changes which may overcome the human condition. Also, I suppose, to be honest, I mean, there's a commercial motive involved as well, that in order to try and reach a wider audience, I've tried to broaden out from pure science fiction. I've always regarded myself as a science fiction writer first and foremost, but because there is such a large fantasy and horror market these days, it does seem to me to be sensible to try and appeal to as many people as possible.
Good idea. Is horror popular these days because we live in such stressful, fearful times? People need a catharsis?
The idea that there's some kind of pent-up emotional energy which needs to be discharged, I think a very suspicious one. If it hadn't been Aristotle who thought of catharsis, nobody would ever have taken it seriously. I think one has to look at it in a slightly different way, that excitation of the nervous system is something which is general in physiological terms, that whatever stimulates it, the physiological state is the same. Now, in some situations, that's going to be a very upsetting state. In a real life situation, if you're threatened by something horrific, then you're in a very bad way. You really don't want that to be happening. You want to get out of it as soon as possible. But if you're in a situation where you know you're safe, you know that nothing is going to happen to you, then the energy of the stimulation is in a sense negotiable. It becomes something that can be pleasurable. And one also has to bear in mind that, particularly in terms of the cinema, going to the cinema tends to be something that people do together, and the excitation that can come from watching things like that on the screen is negotiable into erotic attraction. I mean, there's a long tradition in America of boys taking girls to see horror films at the drive-in because it works best. So I think you have to consider the fear and the horror in those terms.
I think you're right. Thanks, Brian. That was my mistake. I kept taking my dates to comedies. They never stopped laughing. Brian reminded me of something another British writer said. Neil Gaiman writes the highly acclaimed comic The Sandman. Nancy, can you... Oh. The meat pies. I wonder, on a completely different tangent, what is the role of fear in The Sandman?
Good question. Sandman, to some extent, started out as a horror comic. No, it didn't. Sandman always started out as... It was a dark fantasy, but there was a horror edge to it. It was as if horror was always one of the cards I wanted to be able to play, but I didn't necessarily want people to expect horror every month. Apart from anything else, if you brace yourself to be scared, it's different to just if suddenly you turn over the card and it's very, very scary. But fear is a wonderful emotion to write. It can be a joy as an author to know that you're going to scare your audience. I personally would rather disturb, I think, than scare. Scaring is fairly easy. Once you've done it and you know how to do it, you can scare a reader. It's easy. What's hard, but what is a lot more fun, is to have them read something, go, put it down, and wake up screaming 3 nights later. That's fun.
Come to think of it, my dates always woke up screaming 3 nights later. Anyway, Neil isn't the only comic writer exploring fear. One of my Earthbound friends in Control hit a comic convention in London, and he talked with Pete Milligan, writer of Shade the Changing Man, and Grant Morrison of Arkham Asylum and Doom Patrol fame.
Both of you are very interested in exploring fear in your comics. Fear and dread, not the Judge. And I wondered, why is that? We're both very scared.
Well, I mean, obviously, fear is a powerful emotion, and an interesting thing is that in all kind of shamanistic rituals, for instance, fear is one of the powerful tools that they use to dislocate the way people think, and possibly that's why it interests me, because if you do get a fright, then your entire awareness does shift in certain ways, and that's probably what's interesting about it. That's only a guess. What do you think, Pete?
Yeah, I agree with Grant. I think also that fear is a big driving force in the history of mankind as well. Was it Giacomo Vico who thought that the fear of thunder was the beginnings of religious thought, God. I don't know if I go along with that, but it's an interesting idea of something that's fearful of something like lightning or thunder, driving forwards to a belief in God. I think if you start to write about these things and explore these things and become propagandist for things, I think then it becomes very dull and boring. I think if they're things which interest you anyway, when you write stories, they're going to be included, they're going to be there. I think that's what gives, perhaps Grant and myself, that's what gives a kind of underbelly of richness and meaning, and even beauty occasionally to our work.
Yes, the fear of taking your work too seriously. We can't really lay fear to rest without talking to Clive Barker. Barker's collection of short stories, The Books of Blood, burst onto the horror scene like a rupturing artery. Clive pumped out 6 volumes without missing a beat. Nancy, can you connect me to Clive? Clive's latest book is a Magica, and he's busy. My worst fear realized. Okay, run last year's conversation while you try to downlink to Clive.